What if the next time you buy a home, you have to pay more than expected, thanks to no settlement? This NAR settlement can have massive side effects that many buyers are just not prepared for. I've been a mortgage broker for over 17 years and I helped hundreds of families buy homes. Over that span, I've seen how rule changes can really affect buyers and have unintended consequences through new regulation. And it happened to us in the mortgage business in 2008. I've done hours of research on this topic, talked to several industry professionals. I've even taught classes on this. And I even just sit and kind of game planned out, what's going to happen with my buyers based off of the provisions in this settlement. So today's video, we're going to talk about what is the NAR settlement anyway? What are the major changes that you need to know as a buyer to make sure that you're prepared? What is a buyer-broker agreement? You better get intimately familiar with it because it's very important now and it's mandatory. And finally, what are some of the tips and tricks that you can use to adapt to these new changes so you don't overpay for that next house and you know what to expect? Okay, what is the NAR settlement? In case you don't know, NAR stands for National Association of Realtors. They're the largest realtor trade group and they represent just about every realtor in the country. NAR, the National Association of Realtors, they recently settled a series of lawsuits in regards to their commission practices. The settlement included $418 million in damages, and it was over what they call the Cooperative Compensation Agreement. It's a long-standing practice of the National Association of Realtors that in your listing agreements, the seller was required to pay the buyer's agent commission. So basically, you have to pay the buyer's agent who is effectively negotiating against you, and the attorneys alleged that this practice is what inflated home prices and real estate commissions, which I don't believe so. I think they're already baked in anyway. That system worked very, very well and helped get sellers get top dollar. But that's what was alleged in the settlement. Go ahead and hit that like button if you're already sick about hearing about commissions and NAR and all the things. But I appreciate you watching. So thank you for the like. Okay, great, Emmett. So how does that affect me as a buyer? So I think it would be helpful if we talk about the old way versus the new way. So, and we're going to talk about what I call the 3 agreements. If you really think about it, real estate in general from top to bottom has 3 agreements in it. So generally a seller wants to sell their house and they usually interview a few different real estate agents in order to list their house. Now that's not a requirement. You can certainly list it yourself or sell by owner, but statistics show that you end up getting 25% more sell price, as well as about 89% of FSBOs end up listing their house anyway, because selling a house is hard, guys. So hiring a real estate agent is definitely a fantastic idea on the sell side and the buy side. So this seller would sign a listing agreement and it would spell out exactly how long it's for, what I'm going to sell the house for, but also there was a clause in there that required the seller to pay the buyer's agent commission who brought them a buyer within this ecosphere of the MLS. So that was the key in the old way. And this is the first of the 3 agreements, is a listing agreement, because ultimately the listings are what drive the train. And it was the coupling of those commissions that was harder than our settlement. So those were coupled commissions, all within the MLS. So everybody knew what the commissions were on every property, and it was a free flow of information. And like I said before, this is a very good system that brought liquidity to the market. It was very efficient, and the attorneys, of course, found a way to mess it up. So next, as a buyer, you would hire a buyer's agent, or you should hire a buyer's agent to represent you and show you houses in order to pick out the different houses that you want to buy. So what you would do is sometimes you would sign a buyer-broker agreement, but although in practice in the old way, it very rarely happened. You have some agents that claim I always did one, but in my experience, that doesn't happen. It was more of a wink and a handshake. Hey, so you say, hey, I want to see XYZ Main Street, call the listing agent, and they would just run and meet you. So that was great, right? But ultimately, you weren't stuck with them, and they weren't stuck with you. So they had no obligation to you, and vice versa. That's why you can call up on Zillow, some random buyer's agent would show up and meet you at a house. And why did they do that out of the kind of their own heart? No, they did it because they knew the seller was going to pay them. So you even have agents go so far as to say my services are free, and they kind of really kibosh that. It's like, don't say that, because that's how this settlement started in the first place. So that second agreement is the buyer-broker agreement. So that's number 2. And in the past, it was more of a verbal, like wink and a handshake. I'll show you homes with the understanding that the seller is going to pay me. And you might not even known that. I've had buyers who say, I have no idea how the agent got paid. They didn't know until the end. So that conversation about compensation generally didn't happen until after you've already gone on a contract and after you sold the home. Okay, so your agent found a home, narrowed it down to a list of homes, you make an offer on 1 or 2, you come on the contract, and that's the 3rd agreement. It's the purchase and sale agreement. So that's what you ultimately close and you buy your house. That's from top to bottom, from listing agreement, buyer broker agreement to the purchase and sale contract. That is a real estate transaction. which leads me to the next point. But before I get to that, for those that don't know me, I'm Emmett Dempsey. I'm a mortgage broker and owner of Treasure Coast Mortgage here in Port St. Lucie, Florida. And I've been a licensed mortgage broker for over 17 years. I'm licensed in Florida and Georgia, and I help hundreds of families buy homes, and I would love to help your family next if that's where you're at in your journey. So if you all my information is down in the description and all over my channel, of course. In the meantime, if you want to hear from me more, you can definitely subscribe to my newsletter, Mortgage Magic. I believe mortgages are magic. They help transform family wealth in order to buy their first home. It's one of the best ways that families can own real estate and build wealth in this country. So definitely go and subscribe. I publish about once a month, so I'm not going to be all up in your inbox all that much because, we all get a ton of email. So with that being said, let's go ahead and move on. So what has changed? So the seller is not required to offer the buyer's agent commission. They can certainly choose to do so, but the seller is no longer obligated to do so. So that's the major change. Those commissions are now decoupled. So you have the listing agent, then you have the buyer's agent, and their compensations are negotiated directly with their individual parties. So it's definitely in the best interest of a seller to offer the buyer's agent commission, but that's going to be market dependent. So that's agent by agent. You can see how the system has worked very well in the past. You have the most number of buyers under one marketplace in order to sell your house quickly and for top dollar. So that is the major change. Sellers are no longer required to offer buyer's agent commission. Also, the MLS can no longer show what that house will pay. They'll no longer show what the agent commission for the buy side is. It's a case by case basis. So the buyer's agents have to make the formal offer, or they call up the listing agent and say, "Hey, is my seller offering compensation?" There's different ways. It's still being worked out, guys. There's a lot in flux. Here in September of 2024, that's still being worked out about how these things are. But bottom line is that information as far as compensation can't be in the MLS anywhere. So that has to be negotiated and on a case-by-case basis. But the major thing that you as a buyer need to understand about how unintended consequences that they're not showing and all these PSA posts I see all over social media is that you as a buyer may have to pay your buyer's agent directly. Okay? On top of down payment, closing costs, and prepaids, you might have to stroke another check to pay your buyer's agent if the seller doesn't pay. That is the major thing that they're not saying or not saying directly, that you're going to have a conversation up front before you look at houses about how much you're willing to pay your buyer's agent. Okay, so that's the major change that has changed with this lawsuit. Who knows how that's going to take place? I mean, everything's negotiable. Is it a percentage? Is it a flat fee? Who knows? Is it dependent, and how long is that for? And that's the major change, is that you may, if the seller doesn't pay, you may have to pay your buyer's agent directly out of your own funds. Previously, I talked about the buyer-broker agreement. It's the second of the third agreements. And in the past, it was very informal, if it existed at all. But now, it exists very much in your face because it is required before you go look at houses. So you have to sign that buyer-broker agreement, and you need to be very careful about what it says. So it can have for a duration. It can be for 6 months it can be just like a listing agreement. It can be for a length of time. It can be for individual showing, for an individual house. So you need to be very clear as far as the scope and the duration of that buyer-broker agreement. And also, what is the compensation? Because everything's negotiable. Is it a flat fee? Is it a percentage of the sales price? So that's going to be negotiated with just you and your agent. First and foremost, 100% you want to get your own buyer's agent. You don't want to rely, you might in your mind, it's like, why do I got to pay a buyer's agent? I'm just going to go directly to the listing agent. Not a good idea, guys. Because remember who the listing agent works for, the seller. So you want to have representation on your side to help you negotiate, a lot, for many of you, the largest transaction in your life. It's not a small thing to get representation on your side. All right, so what are some of the tips and tricks that you need to know as a buyer to help navigate this section? First and foremost, you need to talk, if you need to finance, you need to talk to a mortgage broker first, now more than ever. So knowing the numbers about the potential, say your cash to close on a certain $500,000 property or whatever your price range is that you qualify for, you need to understand what the potential cash outlay might be, or the different ways to mitigate that. Whether that's through putting less down, using mortgage insurance, or getting seller concessions to help pay that. And again, it's still very new about how this is going to play out, because a lot of those seller concessions in the past were used for my buyers to pay their down payment and closing costs. So now a lot of times that's going to be to pay your buyer's agent commission. So you need to understand that your offer, will now have to be pay my agent. And a lot of times the seller can say no. So is that house now out of the running? So it's understand that there's different permutations that we need to look at. We can say, well, what if a seller doesn't pay? And here's how the numbers look like. So we can run those scenarios. So that's why talking to a mortgage broker first is very key. And as I said before, don't go directly to the listing agent to understand what that means. So if you're an experienced buyer and you know what you're doing, maybe you can do that. I mean, I can probably do that because I've bought and sold homes personally. I do this every day. My wife and I would have a reasonable sense. But, you know, at the end of the day, what is our time worth? So we'd hire a buyer's agent to show us homes and negotiate, because again, we only have so many hours in the day. Because I have a wife and kids, and I coach and friends and all the things. You only have so much time in the day. So your agent helps to buy back your time to narrow down what you want to find and which of the homes that you want to make offers on. So again, think twice about going direct to the listing agent, because remember who the listing agent works for: the seller. And if you've never bought this before, if you're a first-time home buyer and you know what the process is, they're going to say, well, send me an offer. How do I do that? So there's a certain way things are done that if you don't know how to do them, you're going to be at a big disadvantage. And also, first and foremost, buyer's agents are worth it. And dovetailing back on the listing agent thing, buyer's agents do 100 things for you that you don't even know that they did. And there's a lot of literature out there about all the checklist of things buyer's agents can do for you. I can certainly provide that to you if you leave a comment down below. But really, the buyer's agent is worth the weight in gold to help buy back your time, which is the most valuable resource, in my opinion, in order to accomplish the goal that you want, which is finding the perfect home for you and your family. And also, really know that buyer's broker agreement. Don't just get an email and a DocuSign and you just sign it. Understand the scope and the details of that buyer broker agreement, because that's the agreement that you may not, even if you bought a house, you may never have seen this form before. Okay, so you need to be very clear as to what that buyer broker agreement is, what the scope is, how long, because there's different terms and tactics. Like I said, one house, a certain period of time. Is there overage afterwards? Because there can be a time where you want to fire that agent, and then if you buy a house within a month, you got to pay that other agent. So you need to be very clear about what that buyer broker agreement says. Okay, now that you know a little about the NAR settlement, you're going to want to dig in more into the buyer broker agreement, because it's a very important form that you need to know about. And you can check this video right here. We talk all about that and more.